Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
They say to only bring what you can carry. So with the all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor, bring a lot. Like 3 dirt bikes, a few tents, an entire crew ready to make memories. A panoramic 24-inch display, and the confidence to push your limits. The all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor.
Always consult the owner's manual before off-road driving. Know your terrain and trail difficulty and use appropriate safety gear. Max payload varies based on accessories and vehicle configuration. See label on door jamb for carrying capacity of a specific vehicle. Always properly secure cargo.
This episode is brought to you by KPMG. Making an impact is how KPMG helps make the difference. KPMG applies advanced tools and strategic thinking to convert data into actionable knowledge and deliver value by improving performance through transformation, modernizing processes with technology, harnessing the power of data, navigating complex M&A transactions, and enhancing trust among stakeholders. Go to kpmg.us/advisory to learn more. KPMG. Make the difference.
It's back to school season, and Clorox is donating 2 million disinfecting wipes to classrooms across America. Because back to school means things can get a little bit messy. Just ask second grade teacher Mr. Torres.
Put me and just one Clorox wipe on a team? We can take on crayon smudges, sticky fingerprints on every surface, sneezes on the door handle, juice box explosion by the sink, snack crumbs, and don't even get me started on the bathroom passes.
Clorox disinfecting wipes. Teacher's #1 wipe.
Think about it. Bathroom passes.
Clean feels good. Based on unit sales data.
The result of the futile and senseless German resistance to the might of the aroused free peoples of the world stands forth in awful clarity as an example to the people of Japan. The might that now converges on Japan is immeasurably greater than that which, when applied to the resisting Nazis, necessarily laid waste to the lands, the industry, and the method of life of the whole German people. The full application of our military power, backed by our resolve, will mean the inevitable and complete destruction of the Japanese armed forces, and just as inevitably, the utter devastation of the Japanese homeland. That was item 3 from the Potsdam Declaration. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And Jim, today we are going to try to get the war to end in Japan, aren't we? We're going to do our best.
Yeah, but I fancy there's a few rogues out there in Tokyo desperate to make sure it doesn't happen.
Exactly. There are one or two people who've got something to say about that.
I mean, not contemporary rogues, I hasten to add, but ones back in 1945. Just to add that codicil to what we've just been saying.
But I think, it is an interesting point at the war, this. Because we talked to Giles Milton quite recently about the Potsdam Declaration and what happens about the Potsdam Conference and what happens at the conference, and the various comings and goings of Allied leaders and the change at the top in America and Britain carrying on with its democracy despite everything, and Attlee turning up. But at the core of it, of course, Stalin, who's the immovable, object at the head of the irresistible force, the Red Army, the Soviet Union. But the declaration is really striking because you get this, basically, it's an ultimatum to the Japanese to give up that is made in the light of the successful Trinity test of the atomic bomb. And, when they assemble for Potsdam, they don't know if the atomic bomb's going to work. And by the time the conference is up and running, they do. So you can write a declaration that says you better give up or you're facing the utter destruction of the Japanese homeland. You can make that kind of threat. What's really interesting, isn't it, is that in the diplomatic tangle, that is absolutely clear in American, British minds that that's what's coming. And that there is this awful business of getting the Japanese to take that seriously, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken so much this year when we've been talking about the end of the war, about delusion. It seems that the closer these nations get to Armageddon, the more deluded they become.
Yeah.
Whether that be Hitler in his bunker, whether it be Dönitz after he's taken over control, or Wilhelm Keitel being driven through the damaged streets of Berlin on his way to sign the surrender at Karlshorst. It's just astonishing. The Japanese have got themselves into a lather as well. They've created this death cult, which is effectively what it's become. They've convinced themselves that just so long as they kind of sacrifice ever more young lives, and then the Americans will parley. By any reckoning, really, really extraordinary that they should think so. I mean, people say that those who are in a cult, you can't talk to them. They're so convinced. It's people who are conspiracy theorists or whatever. Their minds are not open to an alternative possibility. And I think this is what has happened to the Japanese leadership. I mean, look around you, people.
Yeah, exactly.
Tokyo is destroyed. 90 cities have been destroyed. 8.5 million people have been displaced, etc., etc. You are on your knees. The idea that the mightiest nation in the world is going to parley for greater terms for you, the defeated, is absurd.
Yeah.
Yet they have convinced themselves, haven't they? And do they really believe this? Or they must do. They must absolutely believe this to be true. And I think it's because they're in this bubble of grotesque self-deception that they can't extricate themselves from it until something forces them to do it.
Yeah, but they're pretty confident in their assessment that, America hasn't got the stomach for a longer fight. What they do know about America is, they can read the newspapers. And of course, because America's, relatively speaking, an open society, there are lots of letters pages with people complaining about their sons being away too long and what's the next phase of the draft going to be and all that stuff. And, the American government also is kind of pretty much convinced this war's got another 2 years in it if they've got to fight on land in Japan in the wake of Okinawa. So the Japanese leadership is wrong, but it kind of has a case, doesn't it?
Well, sort of, except that, that's the whole point of Casablanca in January 1943 and the unconditional surrender. And the point of that is to have clarity about the end of the war. It's to avoid compromise with despicable regimes.
Yeah.
It is also clearly, I suppose, to show the Soviet Union that they mean business as well, and they're not going to do a separate peace with Nazi Germany or anything like that. And so far, they've completely carried through on that. If I was a Japanese, I would be thinking, hang on a minute, the nation's on its knees. We haven't got anything. We got no money. We got no food. We got no supplies of anything. The nation is starving. Over 1 million people have been killed. The economy's in death row, and we're completely surrounded.
Yeah, but I think part of it has to be the thing that's making up people at the top's minds about what to do next, because they know they can carry their population with them. They can certainly carry the army with them in whatever they want to do, and the Imperial Navy. There is the clause in the declaration that says there must be eliminated for all time the authority and influence of those who've deceived and misled the people in Japan into embarking on world conquest. For we insist that a new order of peace, security and justice will be impossible until irresponsible militarism is driven from the world. So that's basically saying to the government, to the people making decisions, you lot are going straight to the gallows, right? When this comes to it, they're going to come for those who visited cruelties upon our prisoners. This is what's really interesting, though, isn't it? Is that you can see, in a way, the sort of things that the tiny cracks in the rock that the Japanese government are clinging to by their fingertips to justify carrying on. As the Allies ratchet up the pressure on them with the atomic bomb, they then pivot to another crack and grip onto that to try and hang on. Because essentially what they're trying to do is force the Americans into a sort of suicide pact, aren't they? That will all go down in flames.
End of July 1945. Is there any circumstance in which this is going to end well for you?
Well, no, but
even if the Americans do parley, what part of the parleying is going to be your heads on, going in the news? I mean, there's nothing to be gained by continuing this. Nothing at all.
No, of course not.
3.4 million Japanese dead out of a nation of 60 million.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Or maybe even it's not even that, is it? It's more like
no, it's not even that. And I think what's also really interesting is, I mean, we've often talked about how by this stage of the war, the Japanese economy it's 88% is being spent on defence or something, but the economy's shrinking so rapidly that even that may sound like a lot, but it's not much. Yes, their priority is entirely defence, but the economy is titchy. In 1943, they're making 8 million tonnes of steel, and there's it's the argument that Adam Tooze makes that in 1941, the Japanese economy is bigger than the Soviet economy in effect. By 1945, by the end of the war, they're producing thousands of tonnes of steel. Yes, their entire economy's turned over to fighting.
But the entire economy is nothing.
It's evaporated.
These decisions, these deliberations of Imperial General Headquarters is taking place in Tokyo. Just to remind people, on the night of the 9th and 10th of March 1945 is Operation Meeting House. 334 B-29s. We've talked about this already. Results in the deaths of at least 100,000 civilians. Could easily be double that. It destroys 2 167,171 buildings and 16 square miles, displacing 1 million people, crippling its industrial output. The interesting thing about the Second World War is it doesn't conform to the usual norms of conflict.
No.
It is truly global. It's on a scale, which has never been seen before.
Mm.
But it is really worth reiterating that in the past, people surrender because they've run out of money and they're not going to win. So you think, okay, what's the alternative? Oh, maybe I'll sue for peace.
Yeah.
Neither Nazi Germany nor Imperial Japan follow that particular trend in terms of ending wars.
That the Italians do. The Italians, the minute they realise it's not worth it anymore, that government folds, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly, creating all sorts of complications for itself in the process, but not getting as many people killed, which is what this comes down to. Because the Americans aren't just firebombing. I mean, one of the things that's worth pointing out is because the Japanese have this sort of workshop industrial culture where people are making stuff in their houses, in tiny workshops where, you'll be making cogs, the guy next door will be making threaded components, that when you do destroy an inner city area and kill 100,000 civilians, you're destroying the factories as well as the workers in one fell swoop. Alongside this, LeMay is mining the Japanese waters, and that is having an incredible effect on choking their ability to bring raw materials in. And there's Operation Starvation that the US Navy is running. I mean,
which for once with an allied operational name does what it says on the tin. Japan
is being comprehensively throttled. And you're right. I mean, if you do negotiate, what is it you're going to get out of the Americans if you do make them play a high blood price? I don't know. Our Okinawa series recently, where we talked about the scale of the bloodshed there, and that bloodshed is the way the Japanese are going to bring the Americans to the table.
Because you rather piffily said peace could only be secured with more bloodshed, which is a brilliant line. It absolutely sums it up.
Yeah.
But I suppose one of the big problems is also they've been hoisted by their own petard, because they've created this sort of version of the sort of Bushido code, kind of, which is sort of inherited from the old shogunate. This idea of honor and sacrifice, and that, to surrender is to dishonor one's family as well as oneself and nation and all this kind of stuff. It's a warped, ultra-nationalistic version of the Bushido code. It's not the Bushido code of the 1600s. That's dominated military culture. It's a bastardized version, a kind of warped version, which is folded around a new concept of growth and expansion and racism. To put a not too fine a point on it.
Combined with modern military equipment, if you're able to defend to the last ditch with a machine gun, the Bushido code is far more deadly for both sides, isn't it? Because after all, the old model is a day's clash on a battlefield, isn't it? Of war all over the world, and things are settled basically by the evening. There's none of that on offer here, because he's under that enormous cultural pressure to do so.
What I think is really interesting is that while so many leading Nazis were prepared to just discard the ideology of Nazism the moment that they were sort of threatened by the hangman's noose, the same is not the case in Japan, where people have persuaded themselves that, to surrender is dishonorable and, blah, 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 and they're going to stick with it. That is in sharp contrast to the end of the Third Reich. Whether it's Peleliu, which is basically sort of hardly anyone that I think is taken prisoner at all. On Iwo Jima, it's 216 prisoners out of best part of 20,000. On Okinawa, you've got civilians hurling themselves off the cliffs rather than be taken. Again, hardly any prisoners taken at all. It's just bizarre to Western minds, but I suppose also, this means that when you're confronting complete and total defeat, you still can't accept it, which is one of the problems that the Imperial Japanese Command gets into at the end of July, beginning of August.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is how unrealistic they are. The sort of the feelers they send out to the Soviets. Maybe there's a way through this with the Soviet Union, who, after all, they have a neutrality pact in place from April 1941 after Khalkhin Gol, where the Soviets have, fought them 2 years previously in 1939 and absolutely did for the Japanese. This is one of the interesting things. Is part of the continuity of the Japanese war is this encounter they have with the Soviets in the East, where they lose and conclude a neutrality pact with the Japanese. And obviously that's then kept ticking over during Barbarossa's, the Soviets know that the Japanese aren't going to interrupt them from behind, as it were, when the Germans invade.
Yeah.
The Japanese think, well, what we'll do is we'll send out feelers to the Soviets and see if they're going to stay out still, because them coming in would make our lives very difficult as things proceed, even though, as we've already pointed out, Japan is on its knees. It's being destroyed.
There they are, absolutely on their knees. They're completely destroyed, cities in ruins, surrounded, besieged, no hope of getting supplies in. They go, gosh, life would be difficult if the Soviet Union came in against us. It's like... could you have a more blatant expression of delusion than that? I mean,
yeah. Sure, you would. It would make things worse. You're absolutely right. I mean, but what's interesting is, of course, the Americans they've broken the Japanese purple cipher, the diplomatic code, so they know that this is what the Japanese are up to. And also, Truman writes it in his diary at Potsdam. Brilliant. Uncle Joe's in, UJ is in for the war against Japan. And Stalin makes a promise that in 90 days he will have turned things around, and he sends Zhukov east, gets it all together, and he absolutely delivers to the day on that promise. 90 days later is when the Soviet offensive starts. But yes, I mean, you're absolutely right.
Well, don't forget, it's the Soviets that liberate Matthew Wainwright.
Yeah, exactly.
But the Emperor is at the top of this deck of cards, and that is where the Bushido buck stops. And there is, though, a shift in the leadership, isn't it, by this time? It's not just Imperial General Headquarters. There is the Gunji Sangin, the Big Six.
The Supreme Council for the Direction of the War. They're a relatively recent configuration that they've been put together in April.
Because Tojo's gone.
Tojo's gone. Yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of musical chairs. And obviously, the history of Japan during the 20s and 30s is of Praetorian Guard coups, essentially. Uprisings in the army to get what they want. And the state trying to accommodate that. And the idea of the polity, which is called the kokutai, which is this idea that the emperor is supreme. There's no one in higher authority than him. You do get this thing in absolutist countries where people are doing things for the sake of the emperor and to preserve his divine will or whatever, when they're possibly acting not in his interests. But in this kind of society, in this kind of political setup, people are open to interpreting what the will of the emperor might be, particularly when he doesn't say much. And what's striking about this is, and we'll come to it, is this is a moment where the emperor actually expresses openly a firm opinion and picks a side in an argument, which is kind of not really been his style. He's really been going along with everything up to this point, which I think is that when you're trying to locate responsibility in all this. And I think your comparison with Nazi Germany is quite interesting, because had the emperor, removed himself from this process, perhaps the way Hitler had done, you'd have a completely different thing going on here, I think, because there would have been a reset at the very top, and what's the will of the successor? They'd have maybe undergone a similar kind of convulsion in that regard. But anyway, the Big Six is the Prime Minister, who's a retired admiral, Kantaro Suzuki. He's 77. He was Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Fleet in the 20s. So these are all absolutely paid up, invested services people. There's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shigenori Togo. He's got a wooden leg, hasn't he?
Yes.
He will turn up on the USS Missouri eventually. There's a spoiler. There's the Minister of the Army, Korechika Anami, 58, who is extremely motivated against a peace and very, very, very not keen on ceding
the term Warhawk was made for him.
And Warhawk at this stage of the war, when you've lost completely. Yeah, Minister of the Navy, Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who's 65, Chief of the Army General Staff, General Yoshijiro Umetsu, who's 63, and Chief of the Naval General Staff, Admiral Soema Toyoda, who's also 60. So it's old guys, but people who've been through all of the machinery.
Yeah, but what's interesting about them, with the exception of Toyoda, they're not sort of pin-up figures, poster boys, recognised figures.
Well, I think they're from the body of grey men that had this whole thing ticking over. That you may have these standard bearers.
Blob.
Exactly. They're the Japanese war blob.
He said dismissively. I mean, quite right too.
Yeah. But 4 days after the Potsdam Declaration, on the 30th of July, the Japanese ambassador to Moscow, Naotake Sato, he writes back to Tokyo and says, the only thing on offer is an unconditional surrender. He's read the Potsdam Declaration, he's seen how the Allies are behaving, and he knows that there's nothing on offer. He's also spoken to the Soviets, and the Soviets have basically said, we're not going to extend the neutrality pact. It isn't going to happen. This is all they know beyond the Potsdam Declaration, all the diplomatic communication they've had. And what's interesting is the Potsdam Declaration is, I think, one of those classic Allied documents where it's quite vague in the actual detail, but it's very, very solid on intent. The people who've harmed our prisoners, we're coming for the war criminals. We're not going to destroy your economy unless you make us. We're not interested in being vindictive towards the Japanese people. It's vague. There's no, it doesn't say there will be a new foreign ministry and all that, or whatever. It doesn't bother with that.
Yeah.
However, by 4 votes to 2, they reject the Potsdam Declaration, the Big Six. They say, no, we're not going for it. And what they do, and it's interesting, is they release to the public, however, the Japanese government releases a sort of tidied up, bowdlerized version of the Potsdam Declaration. So the public don't know what terms are being offered, what the actual situation is. And they leave out I mean, this is the really bad bit. They leave out the threat of prompt and utter destruction from their version. And then Suzuki, who's the Prime Minister, he says to reporters that in light of the content of the declaration, which was in his view nothing new, the government's response will be mokusatsu. And this one word, mokusatsu, and this is the word that, via all the ways that the Allies are communicating with the Japanese communicating with Allies via newspapers, via wireless broadcasts. This is the word that then is sent across the world. Now, what does mokusatsu mean? Well, katakana, the letters, literally mean silent kill. So, silent kill, what does that mean? Like kill with silence. So, ignore, right? It could be no comment. It could be piss off, right? It could be mokusatsu, mate. Not interested. There's a giant chunk of historiography arguing about how this word was translated by the Allies at the time and whether they met, whether the people translating it were leaning into the worst translation they could possibly get out of it to discredit the Japanese government. When you go through the historiography, when you shake it down, it looks like actually they did really mean get knotted. Just not interested, given their circumstances. Is really, really kind of amazing. And they say, when the naval minister, Yonai, is asked why the Prime Minister has made this statement, he says, if one is first to issue a statement, he is always at a disadvantage. Churchill has fallen. America is beginning to be isolated. The government, therefore, will ignore it. There is no need to rush.
Wow. I know, it's quite amazing, isn't it?
It is absolutely amazing. And that said, Potsdam Declaration says they will brook no delay in Japan's prompt and utter destruction. It's wild. Absolutely wild. This is the same cabinet who've said, if this costs us 20 million people to carry on the war, fine. A beautiful flower will be broken in the process, but whatever.
It's just astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's the state of play and the attitude of the Japanese government before something comes that even they cannot ignore. We'll see you after the break.
The Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle. Plan starting at just $16.99 a month. Catch Limitless, Live Better Now Season 1 with Chris Hemsworth on Disney Plus.
We got a lot of work to do.
Alien Earth on Hulu.
This ship collected monsters.
And Final Destination Bloodlines on HBO Max.
Death is coming for our family.
The Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle. Plan starting at $16.99 a month. All these and more streaming soon. Visit Disney Plus Hulu HBO Max bundle.com for details.
Hello, I'm William Dalrymple.
And I'm Anita Anand, and we're the hosts of another Goalhanger show, Empire.
And we are here to tell you about a recent series we've done on partition.
On the 14th and 15th of August 1947, Pakistan and India announced their independence from the British Empire. But as these nations gained their freedom, their rushed and violent division resulted in the deaths of well over 1 million people and the forced migration of over 14 million more.
It's a piece of South Asian history that many people are familiar with, but in this series, we want to explore it alongside 4 less well-known partitions which continue to affect the region in monumental ways.
Yeah, you're quite right. In one episode, we dissect how Dubai almost became part of modern India. And in another, we're going to unpack the history behind the headlines about the conflict in Kashmir.
We also explore how the separation of Burma from India is linked to the origin of the Rohingya genocide and how East and West Pakistan separated in 1971 to create Bangladesh.
So if you'd like to hear more about the 5 partitions that completely transformed modern Asia and how the weight of the memory of partition has been passed down through the generations, we've left a clip of the series at the end of this episode for you to listen to.
Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al-Murray, and James Holland. And we've laid out clearly the attitude of the big 6, the men at the top of the Japanese government.
We've looked at this in some, while we were doing Victory 45 and stuff, and you particularly. Yeah. But just going back over it again, it's just hard to get your head around how absolutely bonkers they were.
Yeah. And, what follows is just as crazy. By the way, we have a podcast with Ian McGregor talking about this in particular. But just after 8 o'clock on the 6th of August 1945, Enola Gay appears over the city of Hiroshima. And at 8:15, following its 6-minute bomb run at 30,000 feet, drops the 4.5-ton weapon Little Boy. This is a a fissile atomic weapon, as Ian will explain in that podcast. Uranium-based. I mean, interestingly, it misses its intended target, even though they've got Paul Tibbets Jr., who's the best precision bomber in the entire US Army Air Force. You know, he's the king of precision bombing. That's why he's been selected. He's got his best people. He's handpicked his crews and all that. They still miss, but really, it doesn't matter. It's completely academic. Little boy has the explosive power of about 15,000 tons of TNT, and the US bombing survey, which is conducted after the war, says its duration was probably less than 1/10 of a second and its intensity sufficient to cause nearby flammable objects to burst into flame and to char poles as far as 4,000 yards away from the hypercenter. At 600 to 700 yards, it was sufficient to chip and roughen granite. The heat also produced bubbling of tile to about 13,000 yards. Untold power.
And tens of thousands of people were just vaporized, weren't they?
Just vaporized. And of course, we don't know, we'll never know, because the Japanese population at this point, there's loads of displaced people fleeing the cities that have been bombed, and pretty much everywhere's been bombed. And of course, one of the reasons Hiroshima is selected is it hasn't been bombed, so they can actually have a proper look at what the bomb will do when it goes off. It's a blank slate. But basically, there's just no way to know how many people were killed in that first explosion. And the survey says, the dead were killed, as it were, several times over by each lethal agent separately. It's the radiation, it's the heat, intense heat, it's the firestorm, it's the winds in the firestorm, it's the blast wave. It's everything all at once if you're near the centre. And witnesses speak of a single plane, flash of light, clothes simply catching fire.
And the people that vaporized left burn shadows on the ground.
Yeah.
But it's also worth pointing out that Hiroshima was one of 66 cities that hadn't yet been destroyed.
Yeah.
Not bombed, destroyed.
Yeah. And the US, the Army Air Force, makes a film about Hiroshima. If you fancy a grim view, I seek it out. It's out there on the internet. 4 square miles in the centre of the city contained 3/4 of the total inhabitants. Here, the population density per square mile was slightly greater than Brooklyn, New York. There were numerous 1 to 5 man workshops in the commercial and residential districts. These provided 1/4 of the city's total industrial production. So, matter of fact, we're killing people on a scale that people can relate. I think it's very interesting that they put Brooklyn into it. You can relate, if you're an American citizen, you can relate to the destruction here. See what it is. Truman has convinced himself it's a purely military target. But given what the war is with Japan, everything's a military target by this stage of the war, isn't it?
Yeah. And he writes in his diary on the 25th of July, 1945. And it's really important to say this. His first responsibility are to the people of the United States of America.
Yeah.
It does have an internationalist global view. He wants global prosperity and peace and all the rest of it. But it's Americans he's got to look after. And he has got to end the war as quickly as possible. And this, he realises, is his means of doing, however awful it might be, however much that, once he's opened that crossed that particular Rubicon, it changed the world forever. But he writes in his diary on the 25th of July, 1945, "The target will be a purely military one. The weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. I have told the Secretary of War, Mr. Stimson, to use it so the military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target and not women and children. Even if the chaps are savage, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we, as the leader of the world for the common welfare, cannot drop this terrible bomb on the old capital or the new." Yes, but it is going on the city centre.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you're the President of the United States and ultimately it rests with you, how else can you justify it apart from a little bit of self-deception? My own view is I think that's understandable.
Now, of course, the Japanese reaction to Hiroshima is mixed, so they don't know what it is to start with. Reports are coming into Tokyo of what's happened, but they just don't know. They don't know what it is. And bear in mind, they have been firebombed. It's the single plane that's the sort of thing that's the mystery. There's disbelief on the technical side. So the people who know this stuff. So there's a fellow called Yoshio Nishina, Japan's leading atomic scientist. He studied under Ernest Rutherford, like everybody involved in sort of atomic weapon thinking, and Niels Bohr in Copenhagen. In 1942, he joins the Army's atomic weapon program, and they name it after him. He's so central to it in 1943, it's called NIGO, after him. But as we've said, the Japanese economy is being throttled, is driven backwards by the American naval effort in particular. And in April, his building 49, NIGO's building, is destroyed in an air raid. And he reports on the 28th of June to the Army, no, Dice, I'm giving up on this. It can't be done. And more than that, in his report, he says the Americans will be facing the same difficulties that we are. And so it's impossible. So they're never going to build it. So by the time the Americans have successfully tested the plutonium weapon at Trinity, the Japanese have talked themselves out of being able to build one. I think what's also remarkable, though, is he's also on the Navy, the Japanese Navy's atomic bomb committee. He's chairing their committee because after Midway, they start thinking, shit, we need some good weapons. And they try commissioning a death ray. The scientific committee says, death ray probably won't work. They said, what about this atom bomb thing we've read about? And Nishina is chairing the Japanese Navy's atomic weapons thing and doesn't tell them that the army are building one. I mean, of course he doesn't. Secret. He's siloed. It's secret. Never the twain.
Nothing like working together.
Exactly. So who the Japanese learn that it's atomic weapon from is Truman.
Who announces it in his broadcast day after that day, doesn't he?
Yeah. And I think it's, extraordinary, isn't it? Because it's so secret right up to the point you use it. And then you've got to say, oh, we built one in secret. It's the greatest effort of all time, industrially and technologically. And it's an atomic bomb. Again, he restates the threat. And the Japanese are intercepting all this with the Domain News Company. 1 a.m. on the 7th of August, he restates this threat at the heart of the Potsdam Declaration and how unhappy he is with Mokusatsu. He says, we are now prepared to obliterate more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have above ground in any city. Let there be no mistake, we shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war. It was to spare the Japanese people from utter destruction that the ultimatum of July 26 was issued at Potsdam. Their leaders promptly rejected that ultimatum. They do not now accept our terms. They may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
Pretty unequivocal, isn't it?
I know. Then they leaflet the Japanese population extensively, tell them what's been going on. In the meantime, the Nishina is sent to go to Hiroshima, even though the Japanese army are trying to downplay what the bomb might be. And there's a survey led by General Seizo Aritsue, who's from the General Staff Headquarters, 2nd Division. When he arrives at the airport, and Nishina's held up, when he arrives at the airport, he's greeted by a Japanese soldier with half his face burned off. It's absolutely unbelievable. And Nishina writes to a friend saying, if Truman's broadcast turns out to be true, then I think the time for all of us related to NIGO, the atomic program, to literally cut our stomachs has come.
That's one way round it.
It's extraordinary.
But I love the story of Flight Lieutenant Marcus McDilda, which is just extraordinary, isn't it?
I mean, the sources of information the Japanese have
is limited, to say the least. President Truman.
Well, President Truman, Nishina's gut instinct. And then this fellow, Marcus McDilda, who's a flight lieutenant. He's shot down in his Mustang over Osaka on the 8th. And he's passed on to the Kempitai, who are the Imperial Japanese Army, basically Japanese Gestapo. They have been handling prisoners of war as well. And 350,000 are brought to Japan to work as slave labour, essentially. These are bad people. They're involved in Unit 731 in China, the biological warfare establishment.
Oh, yeah, this is a vivisection place, isn't it?
Exactly. And McDilda's been beaten up by civilians when he's paraded through Osaka. And he immediately is being pumped for information about what this bomb might be, what this thing might be. And he doesn't know. Because why would he? Because it's been secret. And it's this absolutely amazing moment in his interrogation. So they literally hold a sword to his lips. And he tells the Kempitai that the Americans have 100 of these things. The next target's Tokyo and Kyoto. But what he tells them is this. As you know, when atoms are split, there are a lot of pluses and minuses released. Well, we've taken these and put them in a huge container and separated them from each other with a lead shield. When the shield is dropped out of a plane, we melt the lead shield and the pluses and minuses come together. When that happens, it causes a tremendous bolt of lightning and all the atmosphere over the city is pushed back. Then when the atmosphere rolls back, it brings about a tremendous thunderclap, which knocks down everything beneath it. Right?
Pull the other one.
I respect his ability to improvise under great pressure there. Let's put it that way.
Oh, me too. That's just masterclass.
Secret policeman doesn't know any physics, doesn't know any of this, so they send him to Tokyo straight away.
He might be telling the truth.
Yeah, exactly. 50 prisoners of war in Osaka are then murdered shortly after by the Kempitai. So it saves his life.
Yep.
And what's absolutely amazing is on the 9th of August, the chief of the Navy staff, Toyoda, he still doubts their atomic bombs. Just don't believe it. I don't believe it, he says.
Yeah.
And because the Japanese have not responded to Truman's reiteration of the Potsdam Declaration and his threat to rain destruction from the air, they obviously, and because of Mokusatsu, this sort of intensification of Japanese stonewalling, they drop the second atomic bomb on the 9th of August.
This time a plutonium one.
I think this is the bomb that changes the world because it shows the Americans are prepared to do it again. I think do it once, offers no continuity of policy or of diplomatic intent, right? Or strategic intent, but do it twice. And you're making it very clear that might mean you do it a third time, right?
Yeah. And the news of its dropping does reach the big six.
Yeah.
who are already in deep deliberation, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
About what to do. So they've already having a kind of, is it time to call it quits kind of discussion.
Yeah.
And they're deadlocked, aren't they? There's an impasse.
Exactly. So the Prime Minister, Suzuki, Foreign Minister Togo, and the Minister of the Navy, Yonai, they want to accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. But they have a condition, that the condition they've come up with themselves is that the Emperor remains in place.
Yeah.
And everyone else, so Chief of the Army General Staff, Uematsu, Toyoda, and Army, they are not interested. They want conditions added, quite incredibly, that they remain in government, they're safe from the possibility of being tried for war crimes, and that Japan remains armed and able to carry on its imperial ambitions, in effect. At the same time in the background is the plan Ketsugo, which is the plan for defending the Japanese home islands, that they seem to think is actually their option, and atomic bombs or not. These meetings, they intensify, they get really, really heated. And at midnight, the Emperor, he's asked his opinion by Suzuki, by the Prime Minister, which is an extraordinary thing. So they're all having this argument with him sat there listening to it. And their other problem, and we did talk about this, how they're holding on hope that the Soviets will stay out. Their other problem is that hope has also been dashed because the Red Army have come into Manchuria, and that's on the same day. I think what's really interesting here is you have a Red Army that's super well practiced in mobilized, mechanized, deep war, and a Japanese infantry army in China that's basically been used to fighting Chinese peasants, essentially.
Yeah. And is screwed anyway.
Yeah, and is screwed anyway. And they are totally overwhelmed.
It's suddenly confronted by nearly 1.6 million men, 5,500 tanks and self-propelled guns, and 27,000 artillery pieces. You know what? It might be time to call it quits.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, so that's the army been ignoring the reality of the atomic bomb, but here they are losing on a battlefield.
I mean, they were absolutely crushed, weren't they?
Yeah. They just rolled up. So they've got this news as well. The pro-peace faction, as it were, which is the Prime Minister and so on, they think that they're getting through to the Emperor. Army Minister and Army, he then introduces Flight Lieutenant McDilda's intelligence about the lightning weapon to try and say it's not an atomic weapon and that Tokyo's next or something. He's trying anything to keep the war going. And this means the Emperor then leans forward and says, then I will express my opinion. Despite protests from an army, this is Suzuki's suggestion. The Emperor says he can't bear to see his people suffer anymore. Moreover, he's not sure Ketsugo is going to work. The defence of the home islands is going to work. He doesn't think the preparations are ready. And he sides with the Suzuki faction, saying that they will accept the Potsdam Declaration, but only if he remains in power. And this is a sacred decision. And they move to ratify this. And he says, obviously, it's unbearable my subjects are suffering, and it's terrible that his loyal ministers will also now be in the frame for what has befallen Japan, but he must swallow his tears and accept the Suzuki faction's proposal.
It's very magnanimous of him, isn't it?
It is very, very big of him, I think. And they then say to him, the disgruntled say, well, you're going to have to answer to your ancestors for what you've done. And he's sort of, well, there it is.
I'll live with that, and I'll live with that until I'm 89 years old.
Leave that to me, thanks very much. And immediately, obviously, because then everyone tells their ADCs, essentially, and word spreads very, very quickly. The War Ministry, again, led by it's Anami, who's really, really up to his neck in this. They want to fight on. They want to fight to the end. He's fought in New Guinea and Halmahera. He's invested in the war as a soldier. And from the moment the Emperor has made a decision, Anami becomes the focus of what will happen. You then get, it's extraordinary, this convulsion within the army, where obviously what they want is the Emperor to remain supreme. They want to carry on the war, but they can't square those two off against each other. This starts to run towards a coup, and they try and stop news getting out to the Allies that the Japanese government, the Big Six, have accepted this accommodation with the Potsdam Declaration. And the staff at the Dome News Network decide that they need to transmit this message to the outside world. So in Morse code on the shortwave, they send out a message that says Japan accepts Potsdam Proclamation.
Smuggled out, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's spotted and shut down. And luckily, a United Press in the US hear this and take that piece of news to Truman in Washington at 7:33 a.m. on the 11th of August, which is the evening in Tokyo on the 10th. Rather than the message that the general staff have drawn up, who they've drawn up are like, well, we're not happy about this message. Although obviously the Americans don't have a third atomic weapon to make their point again. What then follows is this extraordinary thing where the officers rise against the emperor, while at the same time, the emperor is trying to write up what's called the rescript, prepare his declaration. And the Americans in the meantime, and it's Jimmy Burns who's given this job.
Yep.
And it's run by the British because the British can cope with the idea of a constitutional monarchy. He writes a thing saying, from the moment of surrender, the authority of the emperor and the Japanese government to rule the state shall be subject to the supreme commander of the Allied powers, who will take such surrender as he deems proper to effectuate the surrender terms. So in other words, the emperor stays in place, but he is subordinate to whoever's in the Allied chief is. And this is the thing, if you're a diehard army guy who doesn't want to surrender, they rally round this.
This is just seen as completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it's shattering the cockatoo, the constitution. Yeah. And so there's a race now on between the peace faction and the war faction, essentially in Tokyo. On the 13th, Hirohito gathers together the imperial household. So basically all the princes and cousins and all this sort of thing. It says, I've made this really difficult decision. We're surrendering. We're staying in place. The imperial family is staying in place. And they all kind of go, God, that must have been really hard for you. There's some tears.
Yeah, it was.
Was it? Yeah, no, really, really
But what
tough.
can I do? I have to do this for the people.
What can I do? The coup attempt is probably worth an episode in itself, so we won't get stuck into it. But basically, there are all these sort of different factions within the army who try and, are trying to take control of the situation. And while the emperor is preparing his speech and then recording his speech in a bunker in the imperial compound, there is basically a coup going on upstairs where they're trying to find him and stop him, which fails. And an army kills himself, but he sort of botches that, dies very slowly and horribly. He has to be finished off by one of his aides. Interestingly, there are lots of different accounts.
He was writhing around for 3 hours, wasn't he, with his guts hanging out?
Yeah, but it depends who you read, because there are different accounts where someone offs him immediately. In other accounts, he kills himself in a clean go. It's very interesting that the historiography around that is really muddled. So it's quite hard to tell, but he kills himself, basically. And then the emperor issues the rescript. We talked about Mokusatsu earlier on, about the barrier to how Japan communicates.
Well, and he makes his speech, doesn't he, on the 23:25. Assuming this is on the 13th, is it? 13th of August?
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah. And what's really interesting about it is he uses a form of Japanese, Kanbun Kandoki Tai, which is not normal conversational Japanese.
It's like using Old English or something.
Yeah, and no one can understand it. They've never heard his voice before. It's a moment of divine revelation to hear his voice. It's a very high-pitched voice. He says the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage.
I mean, talk about euphemisms. Talk about say it as it is, Emperor.
Yeah. 656 words, doesn't say surrender. But nevertheless, the coup has failed. The war cabinet has conceded, in effect. The emperor remains in place. And we have ordered our government to communicate to the governments of the United States, Great Britain, China, and the Soviet Union that our empire accepts the provisions of their joint declaration. And that marks the end for Japan's war. It's absolutely amazing. It comes into being on the 15th. He makes it clear the thing that's made his mind up. Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but would also lead to the total extinction of human civilization. So we should all be grateful to the Emperor Hirohito for saving his own neck.
But it's that line, isn't it? The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Crikey, one of the understatements of the history of the world, I would say, of all time, yeah. So he'd surrendered without surrendering, had attached conditions to the unconditional. A war to conquer an empire of millions resulted in a surrender to save one man, the emperor.
Yeah. Well, there we are. Well, thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, can I just point out that we started this podcast in April 2019, and here we are, it's ended. We're recording this on the 30th of July, 2025, a mere 2 weeks or so before the end of the war 80 years ago.
Except it hasn't ended, has it, Jim?
No, it hasn't.
There's lots more to come. There's, of course, our festival, the 12th to the 14th of September. Please do buy tickets and come and join us for a weekend of exactly this kind of chat, and tanks and planes and people hiding in woods.
We have Wavefest 5, V for Victory.
V for Victory. Putting the fun into funf. A special edition of Mastermind, Super Gehantag, all sorts of stuff for you to get your teeth into. And, of course, our Patreon, if you'd like to join that. Jim and I spent a week looking at Battle of Britain stuff too, and we're really getting into the Battle of Britain, and we'll be returning to the Battle of Britain for the 85th anniversary. That's something to look forward to.
Literally can't wait.
So thanks, everyone, for listening. We will see you all again very soon. Cheerio. Goodbye.
Farewell.
Hi, Hi, it's William Dalrymple here again from Empire, another Goalhanger podcast. Here's the clip from our recent series on the 5 partitions that created modern Asia.
And it was deeply emotional. Sparsh picked up some pebbles from the village, which he made into jewelry, family heirlooms for his family going down the generations. Because he was always saying that, my family doesn't have archives, etc. We lost everything in partition. And there's nothing that we have from Bela to show where we came from. But so he wanted to pick up something from Bela and make it into heirlooms for the next generations. 3-4 generations from now, they'll still have a piece of Bela with them, even if the relationship between India and Pakistan worsens again. And, even if his kids can never visit Bela, they'll always have a piece of Bela with them.
This connection with earth, dharti, they call it dharti in India, and zameen is the Urdu word for exactly the same thing. But it is much more than just the earth. It is who you are, where you have grown from, where your forebears have grown from. And the number of people I know who have been lucky enough to travel across the border, and I count myself as one, who find it impossible to leave without a scoop of earth. And I have one too. In Lahore, picked up a handful of earth and brought it back with me because I thought, this is the stuff my grandfather used to walk on.
To hear the full series, just search Empire wherever you get your podcasts.